I feel like we all have the same story with this one. You either played it back in the day and vaguely recall bits and pieces of it, but even if you forgot the name or how it played, you always remember just how awesome it was, especially the scarf. Or option 2, which is where I'm coming from, you heard about this game through the enormous amount of praise it receives, pretty unanimously too. And this adoration has only grown and grown, cultivating a new hardcore fan base over the years, turning this hidden gem into a cult classic. Well, it's been quite a long time since I last played this, so I'm excited to see what it's all about. One more time. This is Combat Overview. Here we go over the general controls, the main mechanics, who or what we use them on, and then seeing how it all comes together. We have our standard combo that you'll get pretty familiar with. They're not as expressive like Nightshade, but we'll give it a pass. Now when locked on, we'll get some directional attacks. Holding forward during your combo will do this 360 spin, great to attack large groups or to protect yourself from those approaching enemies. Holding back while locked on will do this guard breaking kick. Can be a bit tricky to use because depending on the camera angle, this will change where the back direction is. So trying to use this in the middle of an intense fight has its troubles. But at least they improve things in Nightshade by giving kick its own dedicated button. It makes it a lot more reliable, that's for sure. Then a charge attack. At the cost of some yin, you'll do this forward moving attack that will pierce through a crowd, doing solid damage. Only reaches floored enemies though. It's not like Nightshade where it can reach those higher targets. In comparison, it's very limited, so I used it maybe twice. Not much of a problem really, since we have some really great movement options. I just use those instead to close the gaps. We have one aerial attack, but it's a very fundamental move in our kit that you will have to master. A major reason why is because hitting an enemy will reset or refund your air dash. This allows you to chain aerial attacks or kills without having to constantly return to the ground. Opens up for some fun but admittedly hard racing setups, because as the game goes on, if you mess these up, you die. But at least you have a double jump to lean back on just in case. Keep in mind though, landing an aerial attack does not return that extra jump. In Nightshade it does, which gives you more mobility in the air, but here you have to really manage your resources. So it's strict, but makes it that much more rewarding. I feel like I'm going to say this about everything in the game, but our shurikens are very key to success. And that's because they stun, cancel end lag, and crowd control. You can use this to reposition, or safely approach enemies, or to keep a problem enemy paralyzed for just long enough to deal with those smaller ones first, or to set up those damaging back attacks, which is great to continue your chain, or to cancel attacks, which is how we set up those loops. So yeah, definitely don't ignore these because it's very versatile for both offensive and defensive plays. That's not all, because just like in those classic games, we have a shuriken burst. So during the apex of your double jump, you'll have access to send out a spread of shurikens, stunning any nearby enemy. Costs you 8, but it's very useful, especially when surrounded. Just keep in mind they're not infinite, but there's plenty of pickups throughout the stage, so don't feel like you need to be stingy. These are too damn good not to use. Onto defenses, we have this stealth dash step. Be ready to zig and zag with this because you can toss these out without delay or end lag, so it really lets you move around the stage. I think there's iframes, can pass right through stage hazards, but other than that, I don't think it's worth using to iframe through whatever enemies throw at you, and that's because you shouldn't be in front of them to begin with. The game is more about positioning anyway, so as long as you're constantly on the move, you won't have to worry about any attacks ever. Earlier we saw how this is used in the air, but this dash is great to fight grounded enemies too. And that's because we can cancel attacks with this, allowing us to do quick dash cancel loops to really shred enemies. So again, this is both an offensive and defensive tool. Can close the gap to continue pressure or maneuver around dangerous enemies. And of course, has some use outside of combat, can do some fun platforming alongside that wall run of ours too. So it's a very open-ended movement option that not only looks cool, but is rewarding to master. Kind of the reoccurring theme for this game. Looking at the HUD, in the bottom corner we have our health, shown by those 10 flames. Now in the middle is the famous slash gauge. This represents Akujiki's hunger. So as you can tell, the longer and longer we wait around, the more and more of our meter depletes. And if we don't feed the blade fast enough, letting it completely empty, then it has no choice but to siphon from our health instead. So yeah, if you weren't using the movement, shurikens, and so on, you will now, because this will push us to fight enemies constantly. can be sloppy either because you want to make sure you're not wasting time bumbling about. So you have to be precise and efficient to maintain the slash gauge at all times. And well, to help out with that, there's a little something called tate. So as enemies spawn in, you'll see these icons appear, one for each enemy. Once you kill one, notice how it'll light up, followed by some blinking. It's a way to show us how long you have before your chain ends. And it only blinks faster and faster to let you know you don't have all day to take out the next target to maintain this chain. I do prefer Nightshade's way of showing this info, since it's more clean cut and exact, just an emptying meter, like DMC3 or Killer's Dead. While here it's a bit of a guessing game at an initial glance during these intense high octane battles. But yeah, once again, your goal is to chain kills within this time limit. And if you can successfully take down an entire group in one chain, you'll tate. This only works when the chain is made up of 4 targets minimum, but doing so will give us a massive amount of yin to refill that slash gauge, as well as a pretty cool kill screen. The amount of poses are pretty limited though. You don't get any rare or more expressive versions the higher your chain. It's pretty standard across the board, while Nightshade definitely upped the quality on these by quite a lot, adding more alternate poses, different filters, and stuff like that to give it some extra visual flair. Now there's something going on that makes this a bit easier to do. So the higher your kill count in that current chain, you'll dish out more and more damage with your katana. And you can see the buff build in real time by its color, starting from blue all the way to red as it climbs in power. With this extra buff, you'll be able to cut down any enemy both big and small in one fell swoop. So with everything put together, it creates this snowball effect that asks you to be very aware on what's around us, quickly figure out who to prioritize next, have clean pathing between those enemies and around stages, but also know how to deal with them the quickest way possible. It really puts us in a situation to not only be fast, but efficient with our decision making and execution so we can maintain this momentum we built for ourselves to get the biggest payout possible by the end. There's quite a lot of moving parts, and the only game that really scratches that same itch is Arkham Knight. They're both simple in concept, but it's actually really similar on how they create this sort of rhythm or flow to their encounters. So if you guys never played it, like seriously try to really engage with its mechanics on a deeper level, then I strongly recommend you do. Now onto the last bit, we have Nimpo. There's 3 different ones we can swap between with the D-pad, and each cost 1 scroll. So there's a flame ninjutsu during this explosion that'll hurt any nearby enemies. It's especially strong when positioned correctly. Next up, lightning. Not only does it give us increased movement speed, but you're completely invulnerable while active. So you can use this to move past hazards more easily or to chain kills with less worry. And lastly, wind. This will give us a few blade beams. Now what's really cool about these is that it works similar to Rocket Knight Adventures, meaning you can stack damage from both the regular attacks and the beams. So this is pretty useful both up close and from afar. Now you start with 1 scroll, but there's 2 more placed around the stage for you to find. You can use it to make certain encounters easier, or to save it for the upcoming boss fight. I like how we're given ways to approach any fight the way we want, depending on our resources and what strats we like to build around that. So everyone can pretty much form their own playstyle, which is really cool to see. When it comes to enemies, they're no joke, because they fight back, are very evasive, and will even block then counter your mashing. But if you're quick enough to react, you can cancel that recoil with the dash, and since we're locked on, it'll change our up close dash to circle behind them instead, which lets us attack their back to deal extra damage. Now we'll describe every enemy, but they're all pretty similar. Stay on the move, never attack them from the front, side dash is always a go-to, and they're weak to shuriken loops. These rules are all you need from the beginning of the game till the end. And enemy variety is pretty okay, gets the job done. They're either recolored ninjas or flying enemies who all attack the same way with a single shot or a dive attack, or the big guys we save for last. Now what really makes things interesting is the varied level design. This has us approach these different groupings in a few ways because of that. Having to jump between waterfalls that'll drag you down if you're not careful, all while being shot at, then having a Tengu waiting for you near the edge. Or there's walls of lasers we have to maneuver around and then clean up the nearby enemies. Or rising waters that'll make you rethink where you're standing or even land. So they're always adding different layouts and hazards to really make things that much more interesting. From lava pools all the way to bottomless pits. Goes to show how level design is very important to elevate action games, and this is a perfect example on how it's done right. Okay, I know I left you guys hanging when it comes to enemies, and well, that's because the bosses are where it's at. So strap in because this is going to take a bit. At the end of every single stage, we get a boss, and they all usually add some filler targets during the fight, which I know that trope usually isn't a fan favorite, but here's where Shinobi and Nightshade takes this idea and flips it on its head. Because remember, the more targets we kill, the more damage we deal, and the more damage we can... Oh, the fight's already over. So as you can tell, we can use those little enemies to our advantage, which really gives this reboot its own unique way to approach boss fights like no other. Alright, so boss number 1, more like a mini boss actually. Helicopter can be taken down with aerial dash resets, but if you have extra scrolls, use all the flame Nimpo you can because that'll just erase the health bar. Here's our first run-in with our rival. He'll do this charge attack pretty often, noticeable tell too. Can actually bait him to fall off the edge back to back for big damage, or you can dash up kick, which can interrupt that attack of his, and lets you do very quick dash cancels. Once it whips, get out of there as fast as you can, and reset to neutral. Or if you have a lot of those scrolls to spare, wait for that charge attack and dodge it by using Nimpo's iframes on activation. And since he passes you, his back is exposed, letting you do some massive damage with that explosion. For this duo, shurikens will be your best friend. Immediately jump dash right above him and use those scrolls, or you can dash, then double jump to use the burst, which sets up our flame back attack. Either one is a great opener. From here, just do kunai loops on whoever's left. This little guy doesn't do much but call for backup. You can ignore him and go straight for him, but hitting him once will have him instantly teleport away. So, here's what you want to do. Kinda wait a bit and let the dogs close in, then do a burst. Since they're all clumped together, you'll quickly build this large chain to instantly kill the boss. And for good measure, it's a good idea to do a forward dash into a charge attack. For this spider, if you have quite a few scrolls, get some blade beams because it's a really strong start to this fight. Then do some in and out aerial attacks, and wait for little enemies to build a damage buff. Or just stay where you dropped in and shuffle around those projectiles. Do this until those smaller spiders show up, wait for them to get in close, and build that chain before going in for the final blow. This fire guy won't stick around one area for too long. Get too close or attacking will make him teleport away with an explosion. Can do a similar strat to make our one attack worth it though. Stay at the start and wait for those enemies to spawn. That's our cue to go in, and it's a good fight to put our aerial dash resets to the test. Once that's done, finish the job. If things don't go as planned, just know you can easily stun him with shurikens and set up a few back attacks or loops in general. Then this fire Mothra. If you have Ninpo, just go up to him and use one flame at a time. Don't spam because they'll fly off to the other side with full iframes. But chase them down and repeat this as long as you have those scrolls. But after that, just cling to those walls and do a little chip damage from now until those enemies show up. Use those aerial dash resets to our advantage and build up that damage buff. For this guy, I found it very difficult to set up a one-hit kill, and that's because of his shield. Instead, let's use our shurikens because he's very weak to loops. And when combined with blade beams, yeah, it makes very quick work of him. Even if you don't have spare scrolls, I say still go for this loop because it's pretty easy to land. For the snake, it's another one of those hit once for a little damage and it'll teleport away sort of boss. So to make quick work of him and have that one attack of ours worth it, let's go for the instant kill. Immediately make your way behind him and stay there. It'll avoid that beam and those little shots of his hassle free. So yeah, this is his blind spot and there's no spin attack to worry about either. The only get off me attack that he has is when he teleports. Okay, now as those snakes drop in, use lightning for that better movement and constant iframes. Don't mash. Only use one attack and that'll be after a dash step because if not, the snakes will dodge with ease. So just dash step attack. And since we have our iframes, it'll ease up on worrying about the boss hitting us. Yeah, just make your way to those stragglers with dashes and then finish off the boss. And also, don't beat yourself up if you don't get every enemy in a chain. This goes for all bosses by the way, because you don't always have to go for the instant kill, especially this boss since those little snakes can be a pain to hit. But as long as you know a boss's attacks and how to safely avoid them, you'll do great. Oh, this one is pretty cool. Okay, so we fight a blind swordsman in this narrow hallway. But here's the thing, make him move and the water will expose your position, which has him send blade beams your way. Honestly, you can just stand still and wait. I do this until they spawn, and then I quickly jump and use lightning. They'll shoot lasers at you, and there's even blade beams, right, coming your way. But the iframes make this a non-issue. There'll be 2 on each far end and 3 in the middle. Once you're done, stun the boss first, and then go in for the final attack, because he'll block your swipes if he isn't paralyzed. If it doesn't instant kill him for any reason, just keep calm and be patient. Stand still in the water or hug the wall, and wait to chain again. The giant statue boss trope. This is a staple I can never get tired of. Okay, it'll shoot 3 sets of orbs at you, just move out the way. Then some enemies will spawn in, but let's leave them be for now. Now I don't want them leaving that area too much, so I'll make sure to be at the bottom of the ramp for the second wave of shots. Don't get too close because he'll do swipes instead, and that'll make things messy since it kills the little guys. So get close but not too close. Now, once he starts that third wave, instantly cast lightning and move in, because he'll spawn another set of enemies soon after. A lot of them too. And that's our ticket to build enough damage to instant kill. And then Ageha. The classic setup works here too. She's very agile though, so might not land so easily, but keep tossing out a shuriken until she's stunned. When she is, get behind her and be ready with those blade beams. She'll escape eventually, but keep your distance and fish for another stun to set up those loops again. Now for our second and final encounter with our rival, he's a very reactionary boss. If you attack, he'll block or dodge to punish your mashing. Might be reading inputs too, but either way, let's just use that to our advantage. So jump to bait out this anti-air attack of his. It travels a fixed distance, so you'll be able to space yourself around it once you're used to its range. Then punish his landing. Now this is very important. Do not use that regular combo because it'll be too stubby to get the most out of this opening. Instead, use a lock-on forward 360 attack. I found it lands way more consistently, but just like Ageha, he'll find a way to escape. So just react to that and be ready to dash step away to avoid his counter attack. And yep, smaller enemies will fill the room, build your chain, and when you want to land that attack, just use that same jump bait so you can open them up. The jump also baits out a charge attack, his ninjutsu, and shuriken blast, which all have massive punish windows. So get in there and do the same forward 360 attack. Here it is, the final boss. Holy crap. You guys do not want to know how long it took me to beat this guy. The result screen says 40 minutes, but that's only for the winning attempt. It's not counting the multiple back-to-back retries. But I did it again and got it down to 20 minutes. Yay. Yeah, no matter if you're new or somewhat familiar on how to take him down, it's going to be a real slugfest. Man, I got here and didn't drop the controller once because I knew if I took a break or waited till tomorrow, the momentum I had that day might have been lost. So I had to do it right here, right now. Honestly, I don't know what to tell you guys other than this will most likely be the toughest boss you'll ever fight. The amount of patience, endurance, reaction, spacing, situational awareness, and overall consistency that you need to have at all times might drive you mad. It really asks you to be on point with no slip-ups, because those errors will add up and fast. For tips, have a few hours of spare time is all I gotta say, because this guy is Dracula and Nevin on steroids. He has some distinct sound cues at least for every projectile attack, which is great. You might want to put your game on English now that I think about it so you can, understand what he's saying. But yeah, he sends out a fireball, icicle, spread shot, and forward moving lightning strikes. The first phase lets you catch onto those and figure out how to deal with them, but it's not much of a hassle just yet. Kind of like a quick rundown before the real fight begins. Yeah, he'll teleport anywhere in the room, and there's no path that he follows either. It's all random. And when you want to punish him after an attack, well, it won't be easy because he'll counter 9 times out of 10 when the real fight starts. So no matter what, always guard break first before attacking just to be on the safe side. Now what makes it even more wild are the talisman that spawn in. Basically fill the entire arena if you're not on top of them. And since they all instantly start firing away too, it can be the sort of bullet hell of projectiles coming your way. Also, they're very thin and wispy, so being up close and mashing won't land a clean hit. So you want to space yourself just far enough where your first attack lands. And for whiffs, it's best to reposition, because there's either a projectile on its way, or the talisman will charge you and explode to punish your end lag. So they may be simple, We need to be very careful and not overextend because they're no joke. Not to mention there's an army of them to keep track of too. So yeah, be ready to move around those shots the best you can to cut their numbers down. And once you have this large chain going, it's not guaranteed you'll even use this on the boss. He can be far off during an attack, where he's fully invulnerable for a good bit by the way. So the stars need to align to use this against him since this fight is so random and unpredictable. The only consistency you can rely on is your own. The process of taking this boss down will not be quick or pretty. There's no easy cheese strat to make this fight more approachable. You either know it inside and out, or you don't. There's no in between. Because of that, there's not much I can say that will get you prepared for this, other than you have to get in there yourself. I did try to grab very key clips for this fight, so just try your best to catch on to what I'm doing. How I approach Talisman, how I attack the boss depending if he's grounded or airborne, how I dodge his attacks, and yeah, hopefully this will help you guys out because I can't stress enough, you will not be ready for this boss until you're in there yourself. The best of luck to anyone who wants to take down this final boss because it really is one of the most demanding ones out there. But honestly, once you understand how to approach it, weirdly enough, it's pretty fun. Tough, but it's a non-stop battle you won't forget. And that's Shinobi. What a classic. But also, it's one of the sweatiest games I've ever played. That's not because it's the middle of the summer right now. No, it's because it's pretty cruel and very demanding to the uninitiated. And I like that. It really harkens back to those classic action platformers, with just how tightly designed they were from start to finish. And the only way to see the entire game yourself is through mastery. Those games can be very brutal because of that requirement, but I respect them for that very reason. So you either have it or you don't. But it doesn't mean you can't stick with it and learn a thing or two for next time. It's the reason why it's my favorite genre. And this is what I keep talking about. I like to see 3D action games take more of a heavy influence from their roots. Because the further and further we've gone away from our classic side-scrollers, this sort of design philosophy we saw a lot in those early 3D action games during the 6th generation of combining platforming and combat together has become a lost art, unfortunately. So let's bring back good level and enemy design again. Because without it, games like Shinobi, Ninja Gaiden, Zoe 2, and so many more classics wouldn't exist. You can see why I was so harsh on something like Curse of Darkness, with its cookie cutter hallways into square rooms that are filled with enemies that don't interact with us. It's the antithesis on what our genre is about. But Shinobi is one of the very few examples out there that captures the intensity of those classic 2D action games that required both skill and consistency to overcome its challenge. It really is a gold standard on how to design an action game. It actually reminded me a lot of Hagane in that way. Has those tightly designed levels which perfectly lend themselves to the amazing movement that works pretty well with the room layouts and enemy placements. And you get to play as a cool ninja that can completely decimate bosses in an instant. Definitely look into Hagane if you really like what this Shinobi reboot is going for. Another thing I like about this reboot, it goes to show that it's not always about these enormous move lists. That doesn't automatically make a good combat system. DMC also proved that as well, right? We added way more moves in DMC 1, but that didn't make it any better, that's for sure. Because a real make or break of a good action game is the enemy and encounter design. And when you combine very distinct enemies with varied stage layouts, these come together to create situations that make us rethink our entire approach in many different ways. Castlevania is the king of this, and it's always led to layered decision making. Then here comes the reboot adding time-based mechanics to that equation. So that extra bit of urgency to come up with those split-second decisions makes everything that much more exhilarating. And since Shinobi is so faithful to recreate classic action game design, it's no wonder why it's built a reputation for itself as a very hard game. Mainly at the end, but I do think it's fair. You die quick, but so do your enemies. Well, now that I've replayed both games in this reboot, I got something to admit. I think in the past I had a little cold shoulder to this game. Always liked it, but I'd be honest, got a little jealous that a lot of people gave props to the first game, but never the sequel, even though it's a really great game with worthwhile additions. But I was a teenager back then, so we move on. Because now, I just really like both games, and they're some of my favorites of all time. I think these games are brilliantly made in a lot of ways, and I'm glad one doesn't outright replace the other since they both bring their own spin to the formula they got going on here. The first game felt more like a boss rush to me, with just how many of them we take down. I think it has the better lineup and the more interesting level design between the two. But the sequel felt more refined when fighting regular enemies because of the reworked mobility options, distinct enemy roster, and it has the more hyped Tate. All in all, it really is a perfect duology, but if you ever played these games or only tried one of them, well, maybe give them a chance. It's all about being very fast, but also precise. So when we make a move, you best believe it'll be the only one we need.